Has the notion of creativity been objectively dead since 2015? No, but it has been fatally wounded. For most of human history, the goal of a good artist was to make works that looked realistic. But with the innovation of the camera, that goal was obliterated. The goals of art then began to take a more creative turn. But what do we do when the notion of creativity gets obliterated?
Exodia! Obliterate!
All art exists somewhere on the spectrum of appropriation versus creativity. But I ask you, is anything truly creative? This is a painting. Let's say that I made this painting. I didn't, but let's say that I did. I didn't invent the paint or the colors, nor did I invent the abstract concepts the painting invokes. These limitations prevent me from creating anything that is truly 100% creative. Rather, some level of appropriation is going on no matter what I do. Furthermore, let's say that instead of simply painting it, I went through and set up a series of dominoes that, once started, would eventually lead to the paint hitting the canvas in such a way that it produced this painting. Am I the artist? Did I actually make the painting? I didn't literally wield a brush. Doesn't that mean that the painting was not an endeavor reflecting my talent as a painter? But this seems unfair. I had an idea, I created the idea, and the result was a unique work of art. The painting, in this hypothetical, is still a product of my creative mind, is it not? In the last video, we contemplated the Library of Babel and its implications on the free will versus determinism debate. Today I want to pursue a different angle. As we go forward, I'm assuming y'all have already seen my previous video, or at least have some level of familiarity with Jonathan Basile's virtual Library of Babel. If every book, every speech, and every sentence that could ever be uttered using the 29 characters of the library has already been recorded deep in the recesses of the Library of Babel, then isn't it the case that nothing that can be said is truly original anymore? If there are 3,200 letters per page, 410 pages per book, then nothing that has been said or written short of 1,312,000 letters has ever been original. Since the library's inception in 2015, at least. If we accept that setting up and knocking over the dominoes does count as me creating the painting, did Jonathan Basile not create this library in the same way that I set up the dominoes? So this calls forth the question: did Jonathan Basile's Library of Babel kill the creativity of the art of rhetoric? In order to produce an original text, you would need at least 1,312,001 letter, and there would still be a 1 in 29 chance that the next book contains the last letter of your original text as its first letter. I have devised an equation to determine the unoriginality of a literary work. Defining P as the probability of unoriginality, S as the number of accepted symbols, in our case 26 letters and 3 symbols, B as the length of each book in the library in characters, so here 1,312,000, and L as the length of the text that we are considering the originality of in characters. For all lengths of the text in the set of the natural numbers, if the length of our text is less than the length of the book in the library, then the probability of unoriginality is 1, or 100%. However, if the length of the text we are considering is greater than or equal to the length of the texts of the library, then we can determine our probability of unoriginality, but this is just for text. However, there is another section of this website that we didn't address in the last video that provides an even clearer analogy. Basile calls this section of the website the image archives. I personally believe this name does not carry the gravitas that it ought to, which is why I call this section of the website the Gallery of Babel. My words, not Basile's. Contained within this website is approximately 10 to the power of 961,755 unique images. Every possible combination of 416 by 640 pixels, using a color palette of 4,096 colors. I don't know about you, but off the top of my head, I could maybe name like 20 to 30 colors tops. The website even has an image search function that will let you look for images within it. Every portrait, every painting, every photo, every frame from every movie are all contained within this library. Which is why, if you are an artist and you want to create a truly original work, you cannot do so. Not unless your image has a resolution greater than 416 by 640 pixels, or uses colors that are hand-picked to be outside of the 4,096 colors used by this website. For both text and images, Jonathan has laid the notion of creativity on its deathbed. But couldn't we do the same for video? Let's say each image represents one frame in a video. Since we have 10 to the power of 961,755 images at 60 frames per second, we would have a video of length 5.282495075 times 10 to the power of 961,745 years. For context, the universe is about 14 billion years old, or 1.4 times 10 to the 10 years. Even if every image is contained within Basile's gallery, to generate every video possible, you would need not just the entire Gallery of Babel, but your Theater of Babel would need to contain every possible arrangement of the images in Basile's Gallery of Babel. If we wanted to know how many images we would need to constitute every possible video, where each frame can be used more than once, then we would simply use the formula C of n equals n to the n, where C is the number of combination and n is the number of frames. We would be left with 10 to the power of 9.61755 times 10 to the power of 961,761 sets of images, with 10 to the power of 961,755 images in each set of images. That leaves us with 10 to the power of 9.61755 times 10 to the power of 961,761 plus 961,755 images. Since the number of images is the number of frames, then at 60 frames per second with 3.154 times 10 to the 7 seconds per year, this would be 5.284295 times 10 to the power of 9.61755 times 10 to the power of 961,761 plus 961,745 years of watch time. Again, the universe is only 1.4 times 10 to the 10 years old, and that should contain all possible video combinations using 4,096 colors at a resolution of 416 by 640 with no audio. If it seems impossible to watch through the entire catalog of the Theater of Babel, it's because it is. It's not even possible to watch through one of the videos in the Theater of Babel. Of course, the Theater of Babel doesn't actually exist. It's something that I made up based on Basile's image archives, or what I call the Gallery of Babel. But conceptually, it should at least be theoretically possible to construct the theater. So what can we take away from these considerations? Creativity isn't dead, not entirely, but the constructs of Babel show us its fragility, that it can be killed, and how to do it. However, this whole video so far, we have made a number of assumptions that lock us into a specific philosophical perspective. I have had correspondence with Basile and shown him my equation for unoriginality. Basile was appreciative of my effort, but also expressed that he has a different perspective on the nature of creativity. And I do feel it is important to summarize his view so that people don't walk away from this video thinking everything I said is Basile's thoughts. They are not. For the majority of this video, we have considered that in creating the library, Basile has demonstrated the fragility of creativity by pre-innovating all unsaid things that could otherwise be considered original. But in Basile's view, in the vastness of its combinations, the library implies exactly the opposite, that it represents endless opportunities of reinterpretation of patterns and meaning. In Basile's view, there is a distinction between repeatability and iterability. Repeatability is the literal duplication of texts. It's about exact replication of sequences. Iterability is the potential for texts to be reinterpreted and take on new meanings when placed in different contexts and conceptual frameworks. Basile thinks that our subjective understanding of all visual symbology, or marks as he calls it, is dependent on a lack of universal foundational grounding of their semantic meaning. He thinks that stripping our conceptual categories from things would result in a world of things without conceivable identity, that such a separation would yield a world of endless, unreferenceable instances. He believes that every instantiation within the library brings something like originality, or novelty as he puts it, with it. Not inherently within the text, but precisely because it fails to represent the totality of any universal ideals. The virtual library repeats all written text, but to Basile, the notion of originality, novelty, depends on our understanding and the failures thereof, therefore requiring iterability. That originality is not inherent to the combinations of symbols that we use, but arises from our subjective interpretations and failure to grasp any universal meaning. To Basile, this equation that I have drafted represents a definition of creativity and originality that are defined with respect to pure repeatability, without regards to the subjective aspects like context, which he argues is essential to the notion of iterability and, by extension, originality, or novelty as he describes. In Basile's view, creativity is deeply tied to interpretation, context, and the subjective nature of meaning. In his view, creativity is not merely about producing new material, but reimagining and reinterpreting existing elements. He views creativity not as a game of innovating past previous limitations like character count, or discovering wholly original ideas, but rather a process of reinterpretation and recontextualization. To Basile, this equation I've written would be attempting to define creativity based on repeatability, which he explicitly disagrees with. He does not think that something like originality can be precisely calculated. He cites Borges, the man who first came up with the idea for the library, saying, "Literature is not exhaustible, for the sufficient and simple reason that a single book isn't either." Critics of Basile might argue that his perspective relies too heavily on subjective interpretation, that it ignores the objective aspects of creative endeavors. Imagine submitting Jonathan Basile's Tar for Mortar under your own name for a final paper in a philosophy of art class. While this act places the work in a new context and potentially introduces it to a new audience with different perspectives and interpretations, it also constitutes plagiarism. In accordance with iterability, the act could be seen as giving the work new interpretations and meanings because it is now situated in a different context. Your final paper, your audience. This seemingly satisfies the criteria for iterability. But despite meeting the criteria, most people would intuitively recognize this act as highly unoriginal and highly unethical, effectively a form of theft. This scenario underscores an objective fact. The ideas in the plagiarized paper are not original. The repeatability in this context, i.e. copying exactly Basile's work, is what makes the act problematic. The new context doesn't mitigate the lack of originality, rather, it highlights it. Critics could argue that Basile's emphasis on iterability and subjective interpretation downplays the importance of the objective aspects of creativity and originality. Plagiarism demonstrates that not all new contexts and interpretations are ethically or creatively valid. Regardless of the subjective elements, there is still an underlying objective fact of the matter at play. But whether Basile is right or wrong, I cannot tell you. The nature of creativity is something that everyone will have to contemplate for themselves.